Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician, where Dr. Disha Spath will be your companion on this exciting financial adventure. Get ready to conquer debt, build wealth, and embrace a mindful spending lifestyle that will empower you to live life on your own terms.
Welcome to the Finding Financial Freedom podcast with the Frugal Physician. I'm your host, Dr. Disha Spath, and I'm so excited you're here. On this podcast, we explore real stories, actionable tips, and inspiring journeys to help you take control of your finances and live a life you love. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who has made a huge impact in the retirement planning space. Fritz Gilbert is the founder of the Retirement Manifesto, an award-winning blog dedicated to helping people achieve a great retirement. He's also the author of the book, Keys to a Successful Retirement: Staying Happy, Active, and Productive in Your Retired Years. Fritz retired at the young age of 55 and now dedicates his time to meaningful projects like managing his 501c3 charity, Freedom for Fido, building free dog fences for families in need. Fritz, welcome to the show.
Hey, Disha, thanks. Great to be on, and nice to meet you at FinCon, and I appreciate the invitation to be on your show.
Oh my goodness. It's such a pleasure to have you on again. And you're such an energetic person who is perfect for teaching us about retirement. You know, retiring and drawing down our money can often be very scary for people. So I'm really excited to dive into this with you. And you seem to be doing a fantastic job at it. And you do a lot of teaching about it. So let's get into it, Fritz. Let's start at the beginning of your retirement journey. Can you tell us what inspired you to retire early and how you prepared for such a big transition?
Yeah, really, I didn't think about it a lot during my career. I spent 33 years in corporate America, Disha, and I had some fairly senior positions. So I think, higher income, very comparable to, kind of the physician world, I guess, in my final years. And, I was enjoying my job. It wasn't too bad, but we really enjoyed the journey as we went. And I didn't really focus too much on retirement. We focused on savings. And I started at age 22. I contributed to the 401k, got the match, increased it every year when I got a raise, and eventually was maxing out the 401k. So started saving, additional and after tax, and just kind of focused on that, spent the rest and enjoyed our life. But I would say probably by my mid 40s, I started having some of my friends that were starting to retire a little early. And I was always an avid podcast listener, personal finance hobbyist. And I started thinking, I haven't really run any calculators, see if it's even a possibility, and just started looking at calculators probably in my late 40s. And that kind of lit the fire, and I just started getting serious about it and got out at 55. So I was really debating between like 54, 55, but I probably got serious. I started my blog when I was 52. So by then I was pretty much, I'm going to get out early. And I just decided to start the blog to tell my story and let people know what I was thinking about as I was making the decision. And now, 6 years after retirement, it's been kind of a nice way to capture the transition into and now my life living in retirement.
And what was your profession beforehand?
I was in corporate America. I was in the aluminum industry, and I did a variety of jobs. Started in customer service sales, got moved into kind of operational roles. I was a plant manager, ended up running supply chain for North America. And then I ended up in a global role, traveling all over the world, and had people around the world reporting to me, basically in the supply chain area.
Okay, sounds like a very stressful job, and but rewarding as well. You mentioned you were debating between 54 and 55. What was the decision based on?
Yeah, the financials said I could do 54, and I have an uncle of mine who retired young, and I was at a wedding with him. I was probably still late 40s, early 50s, starting to think about retirement. And he said, Fritz, let me give you one piece of advice, and it always stuck with me. He said, you're in your high earning years. He said, you're going to retire young. He said, just make sure when you leave, you're really ready. He said, because an extra year feels like a long time, but once you get into retirement, if you got a little bit more than you need, it's a lot better than having a little less. So that really resonated with me. And, there's so much uncertainty. So I kind of fell into the one more year trap, but I told myself, I know I can get out at 54. So I'll do one more year, but I am going to draw a hard line in the sand and I'm going to stop at 55. And I've now, 61, and I've got no regrets about working that extra year. It does feel like a long time when you're that advanced and you're thinking about it. you really do get burned out on your job and you really want to get out. But hanging in there for one more year was worth it in hindsight. And now we have, we were conservative in our planning. We estimated all of our expenses high. We estimated all the market returns low. And obviously the market's been very favorable and our spending has come in below plan. So we're in solid shape, and I'm thankful I took the extra year.
So that must have been kind of right as the COVID pandemic hit and the markets tanked, right?
Yeah, I retired in 2018, and I think the first COVID drop was 2020, 2021, and then
Yeah.
there was another market drop in 2022. So I've been through two very, very short downturns, but still, you don't know in the middle of them how long they're going to be, right? So
Right.
it definitely stress tests your planning. And to be honest, I didn't stress at all. I knew we were in good shape. We were running like a 3.25% safe withdrawal rate. I knew we had some discretionary spending built into our budget. So worst case, we could, scale back our spending a little bit. And I've never gotten stressed about bear markets. While I was working, I actually liked them because you're buying more stocks cheap, right? So
Right.
I've always told people, hey, if you're still working, the bear market's the best thing that can happen to you. So I've always had that mentality, and I knew markets recover. We've got, one of the big things we did was build up obviously more cash when you get into retirement than when you're still working. So we had a 3-year cash cushion, and I really didn't worry about it. I slept well, and I'll feel the same way in the next bear market. It's just, you've got to know there will be bear markets in retirement, and it's different than when you're working, but you can still manage your way through it.
Yeah, and I think that cash cushion is so key. Actually, you wrote a whole article on how to build a retirement paycheck, which outlines the strategies for creating steady income in retirement. So, can you go into that a little bit? How did you
Sure.
make your paycheck?
Yeah, I was researching different methodologies, and it doesn't really matter what system you choose. The thing that matters is that you've got to design in advance that you're going to stick with. And if the market suddenly turns into a bear, you're not going to start changing your approach, right? You've got to have an approach that'll last through thick and thin. So I did a lot of research, and the bucket strategy just resonated with me. It's more of a psychological description than anything. It's basically an asset allocation decision. And if you think about it, let's just do easy math. Let's say you have 30 years worth of savings, which says you're going to be at a 3.3% safe withdrawal rate, right? So if you've got 30 years worth of savings and you put 3 years in cash, well, 3 years out of 30 means you're going to have 10% in cash, right? And then to make the math easy, let's say you're going to have 6 years in bucket 2, which is typically bonds. Well, 6 years out of 30 is 20%. So you're going to have 10% cash, 20% bonds, and 70% equities and alternatives. And it's not that complicated. The thing that's nice about it is you can size these buckets based on how much you think you're going to spend every year, which we spent a lot of time analyzing that. Again, I never budgeted, but knowing how important the post-retirement spending number is, we spent 11 months, tracked every single dime, put it in a spreadsheet, came up with a good baseline, and then it said, okay, what's going to change when we retire? Well, we're going to have to buy private insurance. We're going to want to get the RV and travel. You change things accordingly, and you come up with an estimated spend. So to make the math easy, let's say we're going to spend $50,000 a year out of our investments. Well, that says 3 years of cash, you're going to have 150,000 in cash, and maybe 300,000 in bonds, and everything else in stocks and alternatives. When you're working, you never carry anywhere near that much cash. And it feels like an opportunity cost, right? You're like, man, I'm putting $150,000 into cash. But the point of that cash bucket is not to make a return. It's to provide liquidity, to alleviate the anxiety of a bear market. And that's exactly what it does. So it's worked very well for us. And then throughout the year, especially this past couple of years when the market's been so strong, typically every quarter or so, I'll look over our portfolio, and I'll look at the asset allocation, and whatever's done well, I'll sell a little bit and refill the cash bucket. Initially, I was waiting till the end of the year, but then if you think about it, if there's a bear market in November and you've drawn down a year worth of your cash before you're ready to refill, you've just lost a year of your protection. So doing it quarterly works pretty well for me. But I really do a deep dive at the end of the year and kind of do the full analysis and make sure I'm good for the following year. So that's basically in a nutshell. You spend out of your cash bucket, you refill it from either bonds or stocks, whichever one's outperforming. And it's just a psychological way to know that you've got protection against the downturn.
So when you faced the COVID downturn, did you pause? And that downturn really wasn't that long, but did you pause your retirement equities selling at all and just live out of the cash bucket?
Yeah, I did. And that's part of the design. I've always said, that it's 3 years of cash. I could very easily go 3 years and never sell a stock, right?
Mhm.
I'm comfortable drawing that cash bucket down to zero if we have to. Obviously, I've never had to do that. I think both of those markets downturns were, 6 to 8 months or something. They weren't long.
Right.
And the other thing is I've got an alternative segment in my asset allocation. And a lot of those, some commodities and things like that can be somewhat counter-cyclical. So even if we got into an extended downturn, we would still have other things in our portfolio that may outperform the stock market and give us some additional things to sell. But for the first couple of years, my intention has always been just draw down the cash bucket. Don't get nervous. If you see an opportunity with some other asset classes, you decide to sell a couple, that's fine. But it's really worked out pretty well so far.
And how do you manage drawing down from like your Roth bucket versus your pre-tax bucket?
Yeah, and that's a big thing when you retire early. Obviously, I got out at 55, and you can do the rule of 55 and do the 72T or whatever it's called, where you do a consistent drawdown every year. I didn't want to do that if I didn't have to, but that was one of the reasons I waited until age 55 to retire, because I knew if I retired at 54, that strategy wouldn't be available to me. If I waited till 55, it would. So that was another reason I waited one more year. But all that to say, as it turns out, we had enough in after tax that we were able to fund the bridge until 59 and a half. We didn't have to do anything fancy there. We're doing very aggressive Roth conversions right now. Obviously, RMDs kick in your 70s. We're trying to get as much of that Roth converted now, or pre-tax converted to Roth, while I can manage it within our tax bracket. So we're looking at the tax bracket, we're topping it off. And right now we're still able to live on our after-tax income. I haven't had to take any pre-tax to fund our retirement spending, but that's my order of spending would be, to the extent that it's feasible, I'll do after-tax first, and then I'll pull out of the IRA for spending. And my hope is to get as much of that Roth, and that, if we don't need it, that'll become legacy, because obviously it's very tax favorable to, my wife and my daughter. If I can leave them a nice Roth inheritance at the end, great. If we need it, great. But the Roth I'm hoping to hold till the end.
Okay. So can you break down the 72T rule for us?
Yeah, I looked at it. I didn't really study it that deeply. I know the concept. It's basically, if you decide you want to if you retire after the 55th birthday, you can access your 401k funds without penalty, but you have to take a consistent amount every year. So I don't know exactly the tactics of it, but let's just say you're going to pull $30,000 a year out of your 401k. You can do that without penalty, but then you've got to make sure you pull $30,000 every year for that 5 years, between 55 and 59 and a half. And I just didn't want to deal with, having to make sure I was being consistent and avoiding any tax issues. And, but I knew it was there if I needed it, but I never executed it. And because I didn't execute it, I didn't research it beyond kind of a preliminary understanding of it.
Okay. And so you've been doing Roth conversions. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, basically, you think about it, I'm 61, baby boomer, the tail end of the baby boomers. So when I started working, the Roth wasn't even available. If I were to do it today, I would contribute a lot to the Roth in my early career years when you're not making as much money, but I didn't have that option available to me. So all of my 401k contributions through, 25 out of my 33 years were in pre-tax IRA, right? 401k. So they're taxable when you withdraw them. And, over time, when you look at the compounding and, the returns of the market over the 3 decades I worked, that turns into a fairly sizable bucket. And I really don't want to get stuck with a huge required minimum distribution that's outside of my control. So we're very intentionally, the other thing I should mention, I've got a pension and I'm on a board of directors, I get a little bit of income from my blog. So we don't qualify for any of the ACA discounts. So because we don't qualify for the discounts, I'm not blowing up my ACA subsidy if I do a Roth conversion, right? That's one thing you have to be really careful of. That's not a problem for us. So we basically look at our income from those other sources, compare it to the next tax threshold, and say, okay, let's top it off. and, maybe even go to the next level beyond that. So the last couple of years, we've actually been going to the top of the 24% bracket because I'm trying to aggressively get that money moved. One concern in the last couple of years was whether the current tax law would expire at the end of 25. Probably now with the election result, it won't, but we didn't know that at the time. So we were trying to really be aggressive on that. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny though, you think about it. Let's just do easy math. Let's say you got $100,000 or $1 million in a 401k pre-tax. And let's say you're going to convert $100,000 a year. Well, if the market's returning 10%, you haven't moved, your balance at the end of the year is the same as your balance at the beginning of the year, even if you move $100,000 because it's earning $100,000 and a 10% return. Obviously, market returns have been better than that. So it's surprisingly difficult to draw down your pre-tax balance doing Roth conversions because it's continuing to earn money as you're trying to do it, right? So it's been an interesting thing to watch. But over time, obviously, our Roth balances are growing pretty significantly because we're doing six-figure conversions. But the underlying IRA balance isn't going down that much. So I'm probably still going to get stuck with some RMDs, but at least I'm managing it to the best of my ability, while I'm at that. I call it the golden age. When you're between, let's say, 60 and 70, you've got to watch out for IRMA. IRMA's the penalty that you'll pay for Medicare starting at age 63. It's a 2-year look back. So when you turn 65, the price you pay for Medicare is going to be determined, in part by this IRMA penalty. I've not gotten to those years yet because I'm only 61. So once I get to 63, I'll have to look at those thresholds and see if I adjust the Roth conversions as a result. But up until now, I've just been looking purely at the tax brackets to do it.
So now that you're doing the Roth conversions, you mentioned you had some pre-tax money in traditional IRAs. Are you being impacted by the pro rata rule?
Yeah. So Disha, basically, I think the pro rata rule applies when you've got after-tax funds in your 401k or IRA as well. My IRA, it was initially a 401k. I converted that to a standalone IRA for the pre-tax and a separate standalone IRA for the Roth. So the IRA that I'm doing conversions from does not have any after-tax money in it. And I think the pro rata rule only applies if you've got after-tax funds in the account, which I don't. So I've not been subject to the pro rata rule.
Okay. All right. That's a good caveat to know. Awesome. One thing that stands out in your book is the focus on non-financial aspects of retirement, like staying happy and active. Why is this just as important as financial planning?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. This has really kind of become a passion of mine in retirement. I mentioned I started my blog 3 years before I retired. And it's kind of interesting. If you look through, I've got a list of every article I've ever written. And if you look at the first 2 years worth of articles, they were all about the financial side, how I'm preparing and thinking about the bucket strategy and changing the asset allocation to prepare for retirement, all that kind of stuff. And then probably about a year out, I was pretty well set on the financial stuff. And I had a lot of friends that said, man, that had retired. And they were like, man, this is a really tough transition. It's a lot harder than I thought it would be. And I just got curious, like, what's the difference between those people that have a really smooth transition and those people that struggle? And I had some friends in the fire community that retired, in their 40s. And they were like, it's just not what I thought it was going to be. They were so focused on the number, right? I got to get to fire. And then they got there and they jumped into RE and they weren't happy. And I was like, there's something here. So I did a lot of work, and probably the last year before I retired and pretty much ever since, I've been writing on this non-financial side because what I discovered was the biggest single predictor of whether or not you'll have a smooth transition to retirement is how much time you spend preparing for retirement before you get there, not just on the financial, but on the non-financial aspects as well. And I wrote, it was actually my most viewed blog post last year, The 4 Phases of Retirement, which I took from Riley Moynes. He did a TEDx talk that went viral on YouTube. So I referenced that in my article. But he talks about phase 2 of retirement. Phase 1's the honeymoon. Everybody goes through it. 85% of retirees go through phase 2, which is lost and loss. And it's this feeling of you're not happy, but you're not really sure why. not necessarily depression, although the rates of depression are like 40% higher for retirees than for workers, which is interesting.
That is.
But it's more of a disorientation type thing. What that represents is you suddenly realize eventually that when you left work, you didn't just leave the paycheck. You left relationships, you left structure, you left a sense of purpose, you left a sense of identity, right? You go to a cocktail party, what are you? Oh, I'm a doctor, right? You are your job. Well, you're not that anymore. So you lose your sense of identity, you lose your purpose in life. And when you jump into retirement, you think this is going to be great. It takes a little while after you retire before those things start being recognized, and you're not even sure. You don't even recognize them initially. But then eventually you start playing around, and phase 3 is trial and experimentation, where you start different things. Maybe some of it's structure, right? Maybe you start going to the gym 3 days a week. Guess what? You just added some structure into your day, right? Maybe you get together with some guys and start doing lunch once a week. That's relationships, right? So people eventually start finding things that replace these non-financial aspects that they lost from work. But it's a lot easier if you spend time before you retire thinking about how you're going to replace those things. And my blog is an example. I was 3 years prior to retirement. I had an interest in writing, so I pursued it. Now it's turned into a major passion of mine. I love it. It keeps my brain sharp. I have interactions with the readers. I do podcasts with wonderful people like you. It's fulfilled a lot of those things I used to get from work. So that's what I discovered in my research. I made it a huge focus of mine. And because of that, I was one of only 15% of people that avoid phase 2. I jumped right into phase 4. I didn't even really go through trial and experimentation because I had done most of that while I was still working, which is phase 3. Phase 4 is kind of when you get it. That's the ultimate stage where you're fulfilled, you're enjoying life, you're happy, you feel purposeful, you feel engaged, and that's where I'm at. It's really important to think about these non-financial aspects because most of the people that struggle in retirement, they're not struggling over the financials, right? You know the financials when you make the decision to retire. So most people, unless you're forced into retirement, most people are going to be okay on the financial side. And where they get trapped is these non-financial issues. So it's a huge topic.
Here's a question. What's the true cost of not having a plan for your finances? With Facet, you don't have to leave that to chance. With their flat fee membership model, Facet is building the future of financial planning. You'll get access to a team of certified financial planner professionals and guidance across tax planning, estate planning, and more. No commissions, no hidden costs, just expert advice that evolves with you. Take the next step in securing your financial future and check out which membership option is right for you. Visit facet.com/frugalphysician today. That's facet.com/frugalphysician.
I think that's so wise because often there's joy in striving. When you're striving for a goal, you're working, even if when you're striving for fire, there's some joy and purpose in that. But yeah, a lot of people, I can imagine I would have a hard time if I had nothing to do once I retired. And it's really great that you took time to research it and really found something that was fulfilling. I want to ask you about this charity, the 501c3 that you're running, Building Fences for Dogs. How did you get into that?
Yeah, that's a really cool story. It was actually my wife's idea. This is another one that we missed. If you think about things that you miss as you're planning for retirement. My wife's been a stay-at-home mom since we had our daughter. And then when our daughter was in high school, my mother-in-law, her mom moved in with us. She had Alzheimer's. So my wife became her caregiver for the next 7 years. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, she passed away 3 months after I retired.
I'm so sad.
Yeah, thank you. But what we didn't realize was that caregiving that my wife had been doing for over 20 years at that point, that was kind of her purpose, right? That was her job. And she lost her job without thinking about it, the fact that that was her purpose. It's very similar to the previous discussion we had. All those aspects that she was getting from caregiving were suddenly gone. And she went into a phase 2. She was kind of disoriented, didn't know what she was going to do. Saw a video on a group that was doing this out in Oregon and said, man, that's something we need here. And I said, yeah, we do. You ought to start it. She goes, I don't know how to build a fence. I don't know how to run a charity. And I was like, look, let's just take it one step at a time and let's figure it out. And she contacted the charity. They helped her out. She set up a 501c3. And now, 5 years later, we've built 156 fences. We have over 200 volunteers. We have a big fundraiser every year. We're helping. And what's so neat about it is we're in this community in the Appalachian Mountains where you've got a lot of these affluent retirees that are moving to, but there's still a significant portion of the population that's kind of the remnant of the old Appalachia culture. A lot of dogs on chains. And it breaks my wife's heart to see these dogs on chains. So through this charity work, we're giving these affluent retirees that are looking for purpose, right? Looking for things to do in retirement. We're giving them a means to give back to this other half of the population up here that has the need. And we're bridging these two populations together. We're helping dogs, which we all love. We're all dog people. We've got the relationships. We call it the Fido family. With these 200 volunteers, we'll go out to microbrews together on a Friday night. We'll get together spontaneously. There's a pickleball group now that's formed out of the Fido family. So there's all these relationships that have happened. We've got a purpose. We're outside getting exercise, right? Driving post holes in the ground and stuff like that. So you think about those aspects that I mentioned, the non-financial aspects, and you line it up with this charity work that we're doing, and it perfectly aligns with meeting those needs of things that we used to get through work. And it's true for all of us. All the volunteers feel that way. Everybody loves it. It's fun. And it's really, it's a much bigger part of my life now than the writing is. It's something we really enjoy.
Yeah, as a fellow dog person, I can tell you, having a yard for a dog to run around in totally changes their life. I mean,
Yeah.
when they're on a chain, they're very limited to how far they can run, and it's basically eating and walking as far as away as possible to do your business, and then coming back.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
And now think about the fact, if you're a low income person, you're barely making it to get by, and somebody gives that to you for free. We've had so many of our recipients, we'll run into them, in town or whatever, Walmart normally. And, they're like, you changed my life. And they're so grateful because they can just open their door and let the dog out. And it's a simple thing, but it really matters. If you're a dog person, you get that, right? And then amplify it by the fact that this is something these people never would have been able to afford on their own. And it really adds that, just a good feeling, that you're giving back to people that really need it.
That's fantastic. How did you guys learn how to put up fences?
Well, it's funny. The first build that we did, and only the first build that we did, there's a guy in town that runs a dog kennel. He's a dog trainer, and he's built all of his fences. So we're like, hey, Billy, you mind coming out on our first build and teaching us how to do this? He goes, oh, that's fine. So he comes out of the first build, only the first build, and he brings his supplies and he puts it in for us. We're side by side with him. And that was it. We've never seen the guy since. So we figured a lot of stuff out on our own set. We knew the basics from him, and we've modified. And, this is one of those things where you've constantly, like you said, when you're striving for something and you're challenging yourself, we adopted a mindset. We're not fixed on our ways of doing this. Let's constantly test the way that we're doing this. Let's find ways to improve it. Let's take, suggestions from volunteers. And 5 years in, we're still finding new ways when we show up in these people's yards, 20 of us knock out a fence in like 2 hours. Every one of the recipients are like, you guys are amazing. I can't believe you did it that fast. And they're always looking out the windows, but we've gotten so efficient at doing this. Now we've just got a process, we've got a trailer that I've customized, and it's kind of a mobile fence building workshop. So it's got an auger in there, and it's got all the tools we need. And, I'm getting pretty handy, right? I got all the, I got saws and sawzalls and chainsaws. We got, everything we need. And there's something fulfilling about looking at a really difficult angle in a yard. Okay, how are we going to address that with a fence? And you solve problems on almost every build. And so it's a problem solving, that's rewarding as well. So it's great.
That's amazing. That sounds fantastic. And sounds like, you're keeping up the skills that you learned in management and just applying them elsewhere and having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. One of the things that's really special about it is it's something that I'm doing with my wife, right? So to find something that you can do with the one that you love, retirement, the relationship side of it's big. Especially if you're a doctor or you're working in a corporate office, you're gone every day, and suddenly you're home all the time. There's a transition there. In my book, I talk about me time, or actually he time, she time, and we time. You've got to carve out time for things that you want to do by yourself. You've got to be generous enough to recognize that your spouse has the same needs and let her go off and do things by herself. But you've also got to, you're going to spend a lot of time together. So finding something like this that we're doing together, we both get the same joy out of, it makes it extra special that I'm doing it with my wife.
That's really cute. I love that. And yeah, I think you're right that, just as in working life, we it's important for me and Josh to have like our time together, but also our separate time to enjoy the activities. But a lot of it's already structured from our work, so you really
Right.
got to be mindful about structuring that into your retirement life too. That's a good
Yeah,
point.
exactly. Yeah.
So in your experience, what are some of the biggest mistakes people make when planning for retirement, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah, I think the number one is we've touched on it already, but it's worth reiterating, is not recognizing that the non-financial stuff, it deserves just as much planning as the financial. Everybody looks at the financial. Very, very few look at the non-financial. So I would say 90% of the retirement mistakes that I come across with readers and things that I read is not recognizing and therefore suffering from the misalignment of some of these non-financial aspects. So that's number one. I think number two is probably it's pretty much all the non-financial stuff. It really matters. Probably the second one I would encourage people is make sure, ultimately the financial side of retirement is just a math equation, right? You've got how much income can you generate, how much are you going to spend, and once income exceeds expenses, you can retire. Eliminate as many of the variables in that equation as you can. And one of the variables you can eliminate more easily than the others is how much you're going to spend, right? Don't just take I'll spend 80% of what I spent when I was working. Don't do that, right? Take the time to really figure out what you think you're going to spend, because your withdrawal strategy, your asset allocation, all the financial decisions you make are going to be driven by what your annual spending is. So I think on the financial side, understand your spending, be conservative, build in some luxury, but some wants in addition to needs, because if the market turns, you want to have some flexibility in your spending. A flexible spending plan has been proven to be much more sustainable than a straight 4% withdrawal rate or anything else you want to do. So what we do is every year we look at our net worth at the end of the year. We multiply it by 3.5, 4% to get an idea how much of a paycheck we can create. And if you get into a bear market and that portfolio goes down and you've got to reduce your paycheck the next year, it's really nice to have some wants that you can carve out of your spending so you don't have to worry about giving up your needs.
Oh, that's a good point. Sounds like you've kind of mapped out the perfect retirement scenario, but is there anything you would change about your retirement planning now, looking back?
I'm humble, but it doesn't sound like it when I answer this question. I am so pleased with how our transition has gone. And that's why I tell the story so often about the importance of thinking of this stuff as you're planning for it. I think the only thing I would say that we missed, as I mentioned earlier, the implications of my wife losing this caregiving job when her mom passed away. That was a blind spot for us. But beyond that, I think the transition's been really good. We're happier now than we've ever been in our lives. I avoided phase two. My wife went through it for maybe 6 months, which wasn't bad. We have both found phase four, which is kind of the where you want to be. We're happy. And I really think it goes back to the 1 to 2 years before I retired, obviously I was writing an article every week, right? So I was borderline obsessed with this stuff. I was thinking about it all the time. I was writing articles. And now
Yeah.
in hindsight, because of that, it's led us to a beautiful retirement. So I don't think there's anything we would change other than recognizing that my wife losing the caregiving responsibility is pretty comparable to retiring from a job.
Yeah. And kind of unexpectedly.
Yeah. 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 I mean, a lot of people are in caregiving situations,
Yeah.
and ultimately, that person's going to pass away. But beyond thinking about, I'm going to miss my mom, internalize it and think about what's my life going to be like. Most people, if they admit it, they're kind of like, it's going to be kind of nice because I'm not going to have to do this anymore, right? Yeah, I'm going to miss my parent, but I'm not going to have to. She's not really the same lady she used to be with Alzheimer's, right? Everybody understands that, especially in the medical field. But there's so much more to it than just that. It's what does that caregiving represent in your life, and how are you going to replace that when that's gone? That's the piece that we missed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, really wise words. Thank you. Before we wrap up, let's have a little fun with a rapid fire segment. I'll ask you a few quick questions and you can answer with the first thing that comes to mind. No pressure. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What's your favorite activity to stay active in retirement?
Ooh, trail running, mountain biking.
Ooh.
Ooh, mountain biking. I just got a new e-bike, and it's so much more enjoyable now because it doesn't kill me as much going up the hill. So I'll say mountain biking.
Okay. If you could give yourself one piece of advice in your 30s, what would it be?
Contribute to a Roth. It wasn't available to me, but if somebody's listening to this that's 30, please contribute to your Roth.
Nice. What's the most surprising thing about retirement so far?
It's nothing like I thought it would be. And I'll expand on that because I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
I wrote an article, Retirement is nothing like I thought it would be. And the byline was, retirement is exactly what I thought it would be. And I'm going to leave it at that. If you want to understand it, you got to look up the post. But yeah, it's nothing like I thought it would be. But at the same time, it's exactly what I thought it would be.
Love it. Okay. I'm going to have to go read that now at the retirementmanifesto.com.
There you go. I'll send you the link.
Okay, great. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Mountains or beach?
Mountains. I live in the mountains. Yeah, we're mountain people.
What's the best book you've read recently besides your own?
How to Retire by Christine Benz, with a disclaimer that it's a little bit my own because I wrote one of the chapters in it. But it is the thing I like about it. Christine, who you know maybe from Morningstar, she invited 20 different retirement experts to each write a chapter in this book about different topics. I love that approach because you get so many different perspectives on it. And some of the chapters kind of contradict themselves, which is even better because it's different people's opinions. I applaud her for coming up with that approach. And I'm honored to have a chapter in there, but it's a really, really good book. If you're thinking about retiring, just came out in late 2024, How to Retire by Christine Benz.
Yes, I think she's awesome. She was a guest on this podcast a few episodes ago, and I'm definitely going to have to check out that book. I love her writing.
Yeah, she's an all-star.
Yeah. What's one thing you're looking forward to in 2025?
The thing I look forward to, this is a year, I have some articles about how it's difficult to spend money in retirement. And that's a common problem that people, even though you know your safe withdrawal rate, you're a lifelong saver. It's still hard to spend that money when you know you can. So my wife and I decided this year, okay, we've got some extra money. We haven't been spending up to our safe withdrawal rate. We normally give it all to charity at the end of the year. This year we said, you know what, let's roll that to 25. And we're going to take a 15-day Arctic cruise.
Ooh.
Starting in Greenland and then going up into the Northwest Passage on an expedition boat, part of Viking Cruise Lines. And we're going to tie in an extra week and spend a week in Iceland, just my wife and I, before we get on the boat. So I would say that's the biggest thing I'm looking forward to this year. Our first we've done a lot of travel, but this is kind of our first, a little bit more extreme type of travel. So it'll be fun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Is it a Viking river cruise?
No, they've got the Viking River cruises, they've got ocean cruises, and then they've got these expedition cruises. They're smaller. It's like 300-person boat. So it's a smaller boat that can get up into the fjords and whatnot. So it's a smaller expedition type boat. So yeah, it's the first time we've cruised on that type of a boat. And I've heard great things about Viking. It's expensive. But you know what? We're at that point where we're trying to learn to spend. So we're going to spend some money and do something that will, it's I don't know if you read Die with Zero, but one of the concepts he talks about is do the things you want to do while you can still do them, because you never know what you're going to hold. And this cruise actually requires you to take a physical before you go on the cruise, because you're so far removed from medical help. Yeah, they've got a doctor on board, but it's not like a Caribbean cruise where they can get you in a helicopter and take you to a hospital or something. You're out there. So we're like, we're in our early 60s. We're both extremely healthy. We focus on fitness. We do a lot of stuff. Let's do it now. So yeah, we're going to do it.
Have a fantastic time. That sounds like such an adventure, and, great job on rewarding yourself. That is, you have saved the money, you can afford to do it, and this is the time. So super excited to follow your adventures. I hope you post about it. And again, have an awesome time.
Well, I'm sure there will be some articles, Disha. So thank you so much for having me. And I applaud your show. You do a great job. And I'm so glad we got a chance to meet. And I really appreciate the honor of being on with you.
Fritz, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and teaching us today. For our listeners, be sure to check out Fritz's blog, The Retirement Manifesto, and his book, Keys to a Successful Retirement. Both are packed with practical advice and insights to help you build a fulfilling retirement. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Finding Financial Freedom with the Frugal Physician. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. Until next time, I'm Dr. Disha Spath, wishing you health, wealth, and happiness on your journey to financial freedom. Stay frugal, y'all.
The content shared on this podcast should not be taken as individualized financial advice. We are here to share our knowledge and experiences, but it is crucial to consult with professionals such as accountants, financial advisors, or attorneys who can provide personalized guidance based on your specific needs.